anything, but would
So-
you ban a motorcycle helmet and a pandemic level face mask?
Using the example of face masks in the discussion of burqa
covers the
or
face.
face covering is like masking misogyny, religious misogyny. That face mask was introduced on health grounds, and it was removed. Nobody was killed.
The point that
or
you've
nobody
made
was killed.
is that it's about security and you need to see each other's faces. So I'm asking, would you ban every covering of the face?
Let me just complete my argument.
Hi everybody, and welcome to The Flip Side. I'm Anaya Flaren Iman, the director of the Equiano Project, and I'm really excited for this episode. It is not just about the burqa ban, but it's also about various harmful cultural and religious practices that have been imported into the UK over the last decade or so, and what we do about that as our country becomes more multi-ethnic, multi-religion, and the extent to which we need to impose by the state certain moral values and cultural norms. So this is a question that covers many different areas, whether that's things that are already illegal, like female genital mutilation and forced marriage, to things that are being debated, such as the extent to which we should be banning cousin marriage and other practices, such as, for example, the burqa. Now, what's really interesting about this discussion, it has different conceptions of freedom. To what extent can you is it supporting freedom to ban something? Well, many people would argue that, for example, someone could argue that it's their right to female genital mutilation, but actually, is that really a right to do something that is not only potentially harmful to yourself, but the assumptions and values that underpin that are misogynistic and oppressive to women, that go against the norms of equality within our society? And similarly to something like cousin marriage, well, people can say, well, isn't this just loving and marrying who you want, which is a right within a free society? But if that is underpinned by practices of coercion and clannishness and insularity and suffocating family dynamics, then actually could banning it be protecting the freedom and the rights of individuals? Whereas there's the other argument that no one should be banning any of those things, such as the burqa, because it's a slippery slope, that it opens the door to, dictating what women can and cannot wear, that religious freedom is an important right within society. And just because it's grossly offensive to many people within society, it is a right of people to do things that are grossly offensive. If we start banning things on those grounds, then we can potentially be opening the door to even religious fundamentalists and extremists saying, well, I find burning the Quran or other things like that to be grossly offensive, and therefore, of course, that should be banned. So it's a very interesting debate in relation to what constitutes protecting individual rights in our society. And I'm really excited to be chairing this one because it's something that I'm very torn on. When the discussion happened, when the Reform MP Sarah Pochin raised this issue in the House of Commons, I was on the press defending the right of women to wear it, but asserting the right of wider society to condemn it as despicable, disgusting, oppressive, misogynistic, and both of those things should be a right, because people have been accused of Islamophobia and racism, and I find that pretty absurd because it's got nothing to do with race. Anyone of any race can wear it, and it has been banned in many Muslim countries, and many Muslims themselves oppose it. Do we need to just say this is not okay and the state should be enforcing it? But then how do you enforce it? Do we start picking on women in the street? There's all these hosts of questions that I've got two fantastic speakers to discuss with me. I'm excited. We have Khadija Khan. She's a journalist and broadcaster writing on women's rights, extremism, freedom, human rights. And we also have Reem Ibrahim. She's a communications manager, and she is a scholar at the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is a free market libertarian think tank. I hope you enjoy this episode.
We're going to get straight into it. So just to reiterate the format, each speaker will give 2 minutes introductions, then they'll have an opportunity to ask each other some questions to clarify disagreements. I'll ask a few questions, but I may interject throughout to ensure clarification. So thank you both for joining me on the podcast. And we'll start with you, Khadija, for your 2 minutes introduction.
Thank you so much, Naya. Rather than expressing my personal opinion, I want to emphasize critical facts about the wearing of burqa and why it should be banned. And I also encourage my fellow panelists to consider religious freedom and individual choice, and when this practice of wearing burqa becomes a matter of public concern in the light of the following facts. The burqa isn't just benign a piece of clothing. It serves as a tool of oppression that entrenches a patriarchal doctrine undermining women's rights. This attire is not prescribed in Islam. It's is a topic of debate among Muslims, which makes it a sham cultural norm rather than a matter of religious freedom. Besides, freedom of belief and freedom to manifest that belief in publicly are two entirely different things. Article 9, paragraph 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights states that the freedom to manifest one's belief can be restricted and limited by the democratic law to protect public safety and the rights of others. Furthermore, this attire is often imposed by men, allowing them to judge a woman's character. Any defiance risks labels such as vulgar and whore, and in extreme cases can lead to unabated violence against women and girls for being disobedient. This attire objectifies women and sexualizes girls. Wearing it suggests piety, and refusing it implies she's asking for it. This belies the notion that this attire is a matter of choice for women. And while some claim to choose to wear burqa, many are forced. It states obligation, in my opinion, to establish a system that ensure individual freedom in such cases, as the sati ritual was banned in India in 1861 under British rule, and the female genital mutilation was outlawed in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland in 2003, and in Scotland in 2005. Not to mention the security concerns about this attire. Just 2 weeks after 4 British Muslim suicide bombers killed 52 people on July 7, 2005, a suspect, Yasin Umar, accused of trying to blow up the London Underground on July 21, 2005, disguised himself by wearing a black burqa. This explains well why this attire is a public safety concern. Last but not least, given how false accusations of racism and Islamophobia have been used to stifle debates on such crucial issues, we should and we must confront the normalization of burqa and the ideology behind it that dehumanizes, alienates, and discriminates against women, girls, and primary school age children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khadija, for your 2 minutes introduction. Over to you, Reem.
Thank you very much. And I absolutely understand that perspective. But the fundamental question we should be asking here is, should the state, should the government ever be able to decide what women can and cannot wear? And that's really the perspective I've come from. I think it's absolutely abhorrent and disgusting when countries like Iran and Afghanistan tell women what they can and cannot wear, to the point that they are risking their lives as a result of that decision. And I think it would be disgusting and abhorrent for the British government to decide what women can and cannot wear. And there are a couple of points to be made here. Firstly, that in the UK, one of the fantastic parts of British society is our tolerance and our acceptance, but also the fact that we protect individual liberty and individual autonomy. Banning the burqa absolutely infringes on personal religious freedom. If a woman would like to choose to wear a particular item of clothing, they should absolutely be allowed to make that decision. And the question of whether or not they are pressured into it by other male counterparts is an entirely separate issue. And in that case, we should be banning many other items of clothing if that is the reasonable argument we're going to be making. The use of Article 9 for the European Convention on Human Rights protects the right to manifest one's religion, and that in so many ways is a voluntary decision. If a woman chooses to wear the burqa or indeed the niqab or other items of clothing voluntarily, banning it completely punishes that particular choice. There's also the question of whether or not in reality banning it would be completely counterproductive. I mean, the bans in France suggested that a lot of the time many of those Muslim women ended up just withdrawing from public life altogether, actually just worsening that kind of marginalisation, restricting them from even being able to see other people. So it was entirely counterproductive for many of those women if the intention is to protect them. And there's also the question of whether or not it's a slippery slope of state control. If the government can decide what you can and cannot wear when it comes to the burqa, what is next? I mean, is it we're going to ban niqabs? We're going to get the police to start knocking on people's doors for the items of clothing that they decide to wear in public? This is entirely illiberal, and that's the fundamental point here. Now, there are absolutely questions of integration and whether or not women should wear items of clothing in public when it comes to security concerns. I just don't think those hold up, especially when the government literally mandated face masks only 5 years ago during the pandemic. So the question of whether or not women should be taking off their items of clothing or showing their faces due to security concerns, I think is entirely unfair, especially as recent history shows. But also the fact that there are so many other things that we wear that ends up meaning that we cover our faces. Motorbike helmets mean that your face is not shown. Face masks, as I mentioned. Balaclavas, we know, are often reused in items of clothing during crimes that are being committed. So often I think the question is, we know things a bit more pragmatic. Women that do wear the niqab or the burqa will always be allowed to take it off at the bank or at airports or when they're interacting with the police temporarily. So in context, we don't ban helmets or masks in general because we're concerned about particular situations for concerns of security. And the fundamental point is women don't really wear the burqa anyway. It's not very widespread. It's very, very, very small minority of people, literally less than 0.1% of the population. So if an individual wants to choose to wear it, they should absolutely be afforded the right to do so. And we can have conversations about integration and the way in which we discuss Islam in public society and the way in which we discuss its compatibility with Western values. But the fundamental question is, should the government decide what a woman can and cannot wear? And I think that answer is no.
Thank you, Reem. So now you will both have an opportunity to ask each other questions. So we'll start with you, Khadija. What question would you like to ask Reem to clarify her perspective or get her to expand on something else?
I just mentioned in my presentation that it's a state's obligation to establish a system that ensures individual freedom in such ambiguous cases where some people, they claim to wear a burqa and many are forced to. And there are children. Reem said that she sees a very small number of women wearing burqa. There is a school nearby, my house, and I see there is a large number of girls, young girls, they wear hat to burqa and they cover their faces as well. And it is a common sight in Britain. I want to ask that there is a state intervention we saw when British ruled India, the sati ritual that was claimed to be a religious right for women. And it was claimed that was made by the religious people that women happily throw themselves on the burning pyre of their husband. So state intervened and it was banned by Queen Victoria in 1861. And then we banned female genital mutilation. It is also claimed by some religious people that it's a religious right, and when you ban it and when you make it illegal, then you infringe on religious people's right to practice their beliefs. So in these cases, the state did intervene. The state did protect people who were unable to speak for themselves and they were suffering in silence. So how can she make this argument that issue which is concerning for the gender equality and in terms of integration and in terms of security concerns in the country, how can she make this argument that state should not be intervening?
Well, the question of children, I think, is an entirely separate issue, and many children are often pressured into doing so many different things by their parents. I was definitely pressured as a child to pray 5 times a day, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the state should be intervening in those particular circumstances. FGM, I think, is entirely separate. That is a violation of you physically, and the state should absolutely, I mean, it's outlawed, it's illegal, it's harming somebody else, and there is absolutely no medical reason to do something like that to a person. So, absolutely anything that's a violation of what I would call the non-aggression principle, which is a violation of somebody's individual rights as a human being, then absolutely that is outlawed and it is illegal for a reason. The question is, should the government decide what women wear? And I think the answer is still absolutely no. I completely understand the perspective that many of these women are pressured into wearing particular items of clothing. But if we go down this path, what we end up seeing is we allow the government to continuously decide what individuals may or may not choose to do. Many women are also pressured into wearing the hijab. Are we going to also ban that? Many women are also pressured into wearing items of clothing. And I don't think the answer is a point blanket approach and banning something from every single individual. Now, do I personally want to see women wearing a burqa? No, I like to see people's faces. I was against the face mask mandates during the pandemic. I don't like to see the government deciding what people wear any time of the day, any time of the year, and any circumstance whatsoever. Now, if we want to have a conversation about how we can ensure that women in oppressed societies or restricted societies or abusive relationships can be protected, we can absolutely have that conversation. And I personally think that the solution is economic liberation. If those women are afforded the freedom to own their own bank accounts and earn their own money, they are so much more likely to have that freedom. I actually think that, for example, in terms of women's liberation and the history of it, the time at which, so the end of the 19th century, where women were able to own their own bank accounts and earn their own money, was far more of a milestone for women's liberation than even the suffragette movement. I mean, I think voting was so much less significant than the financial freedom that was afforded to women at the end of the 19th century, because it meant that women were able to leave families and abusive households and situations in which they felt pressured. So I think the question of actually allowing those women to have more freedom, not less, is really the fundamental point here. I understand that there is pressure. I understand that society can feel controlling sometimes, but the solution is absolutely not more state intervention.
Okay, Khadija, you have one more question?
I would like to say something in response to what just Reem said. She just said that absolutely no intervention from the state. I would say there are people who want to have a discussion about it, who want to have, in a democratic society, we have a right to have discussion on these issues. So when you say absolutely not, I find it totalitarian, authoritarian, state of affairs, and that should not be here in Britain. That is a vibrant democracy. And when you talk about, alienating these women who are coming from these closed communities, I think the only thing, if it alienates them, it's the ultra-conservative mores, which are not even required by the religion. As I said, this attire is not prescribed in Islam, and it's a debate among Muslims because people who are very literalist or very radical in their approach, they want to impose this attire on women, and there are different, factors by which women are coerced and forced into wearing it. There is a pressure from the family, pressure from the peers, pressure from the religious authorities, and it's not something that women, they can decide for themselves. And you said about children, I was also a child once, and I know that we love to do the things that our parents, especially our mothers, they do. But the idea that children wear a burqa to emulate their mothers is misguided, in my opinion, in this discussion. Children do not always emulate their mothers 24/7 a day, 7 days a week, 30 days a month, 365 days a year, and in extension for the rest of their lives. They eventually outgrow their likes and dislike over time. Saying this, that these girls, they decide from the age of 3 or 4 to wear burqa because their mothers wear it and continue to wear it for the rest of their life, I find it really dramatic.
Let's give Reem a chance to respond. Is there anything there you wanted to respond to?
Well, the question of whether, I completely understand from an Islamic perspective it isn't required, but neither are so many things that Muslims decide to do, often day in and day out. But that's their right. That's their right as in a free society to practice their faith as they wish to. And the question of whether or not, you said, we should be allowed to have this conversation, that's totalitarian to say. We're absolutely allowed to have a conversation. It's a free society. And that's why we're having this very conversation right now. But I am a libertarian. I believe that the state has no right to tell any adult in any circumstance what they are allowed to wear. And that's my perspective on the role of the government and the role of the state. I believe it to be true in the economy, and I believe it to be true in other social issues. The government has no right to tell a woman what she can and cannot wear. And the question of whether, well, in my view, it's not Islamic. Okay, but in another person's view, it may be the way that they choose to practice their faith. And in a free society, we should recognise that different people have different perspectives on what faith looks like for them. In France, they have banned all kind of religious outgoings, and it means that so many Muslims are unable to practice their faith in the way that they choose to, and in a way that they genuinely choose to, in ways that those women aren't pressured into making those decisions. Now, again, the conversation about how we can liberate those women, I think, is absolutely an important one to be had. And from my perspective, I think economic liberation is the way we ensure women are more likely to be making those choices themselves. But if a woman chooses to wear a burqa and she is not pressured into doing so, I think it's none of the state's business.
All right, so now you've got your chance, Reem, to ask Khadija 2 questions.
Yes. So what do you think of the security concerns we mentioned? The fact that there are so many other cases in which women, or men even, are recovering their faces. Would you also ban bicycle helmets or sort of motorcycle helmets? Would you also ban other items of clothing that cover your face? Would you ban balaclavas? Would you ban face masks? And how do you expect this to be enforced? Do you want the police to go around arresting women that are wearing a burqa? What would you like to actually happen?
First of all, I would like to just remove this fallacy from this argument that it is about, specifically targeting a particular section of the society. It's about face covering in European countries where we have these laws enforced, where the face covering, including burqa, is banned. They have done so in order to identify people in public spaces because it's
What about the face masks and motorcycle helmets?
Yeah, I'm just coming to this. It's a security concern, and it's not only about European countries. There are Muslim majority countries. Recently, Tajikistan, they have banned, face covering in public places, including burqa. We have to change our perspective on this issue because disingenuously, this has been made all about putting ban on women's clothing when it is not. It is about face covering. Burqa is an item that covers face. Yes, this is a security issue that has been recognized not only by the European state, but also by Muslim majority countries like Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, Tajikistan, Kosovo, Kyrgyzstan. Their people see this as a security concern. The people see it as an emblem of a radical Islam, a symbol of alien culture, which
I understand what they think, but would you ban a motorcycle helmet and a pandemic level face mask?
It's again using the example of face masks in the discussion of burqa or face covering is like masking misogyny, religious misogyny. That face mask was introduced on health grounds and it was removed. Nobody was killed.
The point that you've made is that it's about security and you need to see each other's faces. So I'm asking, would you ban every covering of the face?
Let me just complete my argument. Nobody was killed after they removed the mask. Nobody was tortured. Nobody was forced to wear it after those health condition was over and the concerns were dealt with. So this is a very fallacious argument and very
you don't care about the security concerns.
Discussion to avoid the discussion on this issue. I think we are talking about specifically face covering when it comes to security concerns, and burqa and niqab are included in those items which covers your identity in public spaces and which is a security threat. As I have said in my presentation, that a suicide bomber, a suspect who wanted to blow up the London Underground on 21 July 2005, he disguised himself by covering himself in black burqa. So yes, it is a security threat for British people and we need to look at as such.
Okay, so you have a chance to ask one more question, Reem.
Well, I suppose the response here is what is stopping anybody from covering their faces using a motorcycle helmet or a pandemic face mask? I mean, the point here is if the question is security, and clearly it sounds like Khadija doesn't actually care about the security concerns because otherwise she would say, yes, we should also ban motorcycle helmets and anything else that covers your face.
I'm seeing all face covering.
So you would ban Face masks in
The
public.
motorcycle helmet, we wear it the moment we are riding bikes, and then we need to remove it in public place. We cannot just continue walking down the street while wearing, a motorbike helmet. It would be seen, here even in the UK, it would be seen absurd, people doing so. So I am talking about
So
face
you want it to
covering,
be illegal. You want it to be
including
banned.
burqa.
Would you, so you, just to be clear, just so I'm clear on this position, you want to ban motorcycle helmets in public, you want to ban face masks, which were mandatory only 5 years ago, and also the niqab as well as the burqa. You want all of those things banned.
Again, I just explained the face masks were used to avoid a health
But
condition.
yes or no?
It was over.
Wait,
Do you want them
let's
banned?
let no interruption. We need to hear everyone coming back. So
This is
just
to
answer
avoid-
that question, Khadija.
Yeah, this is to avoid the discussion on the face covering, including burqa, because I have told you when we use the face mask, that was for a reason, and we then stopped using it because that health condition or concerns were dealt with. So nobody was killed after we removed the face mask. Nobody was tortured. Nobody was confined in four walls. Nobody was coerced into wearing it after the concerns were dealt with. So it's just false equivalence, I would say.
Okay, just to add on Reem's point, just to clarify, because on that question of how would you enforce it, Khadija, because I mean, I remember it wasn't very nice. The odd time I didn't wear a face covering, you'd have other people shouting at you in the train or the bus, or you might actually be stopped by officials. Is that the kind of thing that you would want to see when it comes to because yes, there are definitely people that I see wearing it where I live in London, but some of those people are actually female tourists from the Gulf. So that might also be a strange thing, seeing police officers and officials kind of policing them. So on that point that Reem made about how would you police it, what would be your response to that?
See, Anna, as I said, that we live in a democracy. I don't want state to make any decision authoritatively. I want them to let us have a discussion, and then people, with the consent of the people, because we are a democracy, we have to have some legislation on this issue so that we can deal with the issues regarding security and gender equality and integration. So when you talk about masks, that was done for a particular time, for a particular period. There was. I was not saying that there was not protest against it. People were protesting. People didn't want to wear it, and many of the people, they did not wear it. I know there was policing going on, but still people defied. They didn't want to wear it. But my question is, nobody was harmed. Nobody was, again, I would use these kind of words, that nobody was tortured. Nobody was confined in doing so, in compliance or in defiance. Nobody was hurt in that process. Yes, people had their grievances. They voiced their grievances. They protested. But then again, it's a false equivalence. For me, it's like masking misogyny, religious misogyny. It's a diversion from this discussion, which is regarding human rights, women's rights, children's rights, and then security. When we talk about security concern, it's about people's right, to be feeling safe and secure in a society that they call their home.
It's absolutely not a false equalisation when you've made the argument that we must see people's faces because of security concerns and to make people feel safe. And I've taken that argument and said, okay, would you apply that to other situations? And you've said, I don't really know what your answer is, yes or no. Would you ban motorcycle helmets? Would you ban?
Okay, we're gonna move on now.
Well, if the answer is no, then security concerns are not your concern at all. You just care
I never
about
said no. I never said no.
Being of religious context,
I
and
never
that's fine.
said no.
That's the argument you're making.
But
No,
okay, we will move on. So I'm now going to ask you both a series of questions. So first, I want to go to you, Reem, because you've talked a lot about individual rights, and I think that is important. But what about the rights of wider society? So, for example, I actually don't have the right to wear whatever I want as a woman. I'm not allowed to walk around in a bikini. That would be regarded as indecent exposure if I walk around in a bikini outside of a very, very specific context, which is on the beach. And the reason for that is because people regard that as indecent and offensive and undermining of social norms. So it is not true that we have an absolute right to wear whatever we want as women, and we already have circumstances where that is actually policed for the collective good. So how is it different in the sense of the burqa?
You do have the right to walk around in a bikini if you wish to. The point is that many people would probably come up to you and say, "What are you doing? That's really odd." And that is social pressure, which is entirely different to what Khadija is suggesting, which is a ban, which it would have to be policed and would have to be resulting in women being arrested for the items of clothing that they are wearing, which I think is dangerously totalitarian. So you absolutely have the right to wear whatever you want, legal right. Do you have the right to be free from social shaming? No. And we can have a conversation about whether or not those women that do wear the burqa, that choose to wear the burqa, are unable to integrate in society. And I would say yes. I mean, I'm against people wearing it. I just don't think it should be illegal. I think that the law is what is used as by a coercive state, and it's totalitarian for any country, whether it be a Middle Eastern country or a Western country, to decide what women can and cannot wear. So you have the right to do so, but social shaming, but also societal standards and what we believe is decent is absolutely right. And I am rather conservative in my views on that. And I think it's absolutely right to have that conversation. So the question is the difference between the law, which I'm against making it illegal, and what is societally acceptable.
And then just sticking on that point, because sometimes rights can come into conflict. Remember when it came to the Batley grammar school situation where the teacher was forced into hiding for showing an image of the cartoon of the Muslim prophet. Many protesters in the area, they had a right to freedom of speech and protest. But their speech and their behaviour essentially was created an atmosphere of intimidation, which you could argue silenced the rights of the teacher, which actually did lead to that. So in certain situations, the state many people felt the state didn't intervene enough to actually protect the right of the teacher. So can you see actually when religious rights and actually the individual rights of others can often come into conflict and the state has to intervene, sometimes taking one stance or another?
The state should never take one stance or another. The state's role, as a libertarian, this is my view on the state as a whole, is to protect those rights. So the teacher in that situation has the right to not be physically harmed by those protesters. And equally, those protesters have the absolute right to freedom, or should have at least, the absolute right to freedom of expression. So if they would like to express disquiet over the teacher's behaviour, they absolutely should have the freedom to do so. That teacher was not worried about speech from those particular parents. He was worried that those people, or some of those people, or somebody that listened to those protests would go out and physically harm him. And, you know, in many circumstances, that fear had become reality. So the question is, protest is absolutely a fundamental right as an individual, but equally the non-aggression principle and the right to not be physically harmed is always protected by the state, and that's where those rights are always going to be compatible. The state's role is to protect those individual rights, not to restrict them, and banning the burqa would be a restriction of those rights.
And just to clarify, would you also defend the right of the teacher in that context to have shown those images?
It depends on the school, if it's a private school or a public state school, and if they've got particular rules.
Well, a state school?
Yeah, in a state school, then no. I mean, the question is what is particularly allowed within that particular school. This is a question of property rights. In a private school where they're allowed to, they have certain rules and procedures, and the teacher's allowed to do certain things.
On that circumstance, that was agreed that he was going to do that. It was, and that was approved by the teachers and the hierarchy in that school. It was only after the fact, with the reaction, where the school didn't support him. So would you have backed the teacher?
Well, if the school had decided and made a rule that was absolutely something that he's allowed to do, then the school should have supported him. I mean, he was allowed to do it within that context. So yeah, he was absolutely allowed to do that. But that's what freedom is, right? The freedom to discuss and debate and defend the grotesque. I would defend, hate speech. I don't believe in hate speech as a concept. I think people should be allowed to say as they wish within a free society. But the point is, the state's role is to protect those individual rights, not to restrict them.
And then some questions for you, Khadija. On that point that Reem made about the difference between like aggression, like physical violence, and not, isn't that a very important point when it comes to female genital mutilation? For example, that is a physical harm, whereas an item of clothing is substantially lesser, and it's not actually physically violent.
It's a tragedy of our time that nobody would be allowed to abuse their children mentally or physically in Britain, in today's modern Britain. But when it comes to from religious point of view, people are allowed to do whatever they want to do with their religion, even if they are not allowed to do illegally. They have been given, these kind of impressions and turning a blind eye to what is going on around. These kind of things, they embolden and encourage them to treat their children the way they want. When I was a child, I was forced to wear a hijab by my father, and I didn't have any agency as a child. I couldn't say no to him. He was a 6 feet tall man. I was so afraid for my life because I knew that if I would say no, he would kill me, literally, because the way he was treating me at that moment by, sternly lecturing me about the honor of the family, about the honor of the religion, about his status in the society, and what would the family members say, if I will not cover my head or cover myself from head to toe. I was afraid. I was feeling so afraid as a child. At that moment, my mother stepped forward. She protected me. She confronted my father, and she paid a huge price for that. So please don't tell me that it's a matter of choice for these young girls, and it does not include abuse and, aggression, physical aggression. It does include. You just never happen to see that because these kind of stories and these kind of accounts only make headlines when unfortunately, I don't want to say this, when people are literally, these girls are killed for defiance, for saying that we don't want to comply. But you tell me, when there is this kind of environment and these kind of circumstances, who doesn't want to save their life? Who doesn't want to protect themselves from the violence that can be inflicted upon them by their own father, by their own brother, and the community members? So this is a very strange and absurd statement to say that the issue of burqa has nothing to do with the physical aggression, so state should not be intervening. There is physical aggression involved.
Can I just
ask a question? I mean, I think Khadija's absolutely right, and I think, well, thank you for sharing that particular perspective and what's happened to you in your own life. And I think that really does get to the heart of it. So many of those women are, of course, pressured, and in so many ways. I mean, we talk about honour killing, which has happened so many times across the country, and it is a barbaric and horrendous practice. But I just don't see how banning the burqa, making it illegal, would ever protect any of those women.
Just to add on that point, Khadija, because you were talking specifically in your case about the hijab. So what do you say about Reem's point? Because many of the arguments you've made about coercion and women's rights could also be applied to the hijab, but there isn't much discussion, or I presume you're also not advocating banning the hijab as well.
No, I am not talking about hijab in this context. I'm specifically talking about burqa, that covers face and hides, conceal identity in terms of security concern, but also in terms of gender equality, because I see that this normalization of burqa, this attire, which is being normalized on the pretext of religious modesty, it is, becoming rife in certain section of the British society. And I think that it's high time that we put this political correctness and, sitting on the fence thing aside and just talk about human beings. I know that there is a discussion that has been stifled in the, by hurling around the accusation of racism, Islamophobia. Every time women like me who want to talk about it, they have been demonized. They have been treated like pariah in modern day Britain, where we claim to be the champion of women's rights, but we don't want to have discussion on this issue. My only concern is that we are a democratic society. If we are going to ban this attire, and like with other face coverings, over the issues of security or over the issues of integration or over the issues of gender equality, we need to have a discussion. But at the moment, we are not even able to have an honest and frank discussion on this issue, because the fear, you just talk about Batley Grammar's teacher, his fear was not only fear, it was a legitimate fear. He knew that he would be killed, his family would be killed, and that was the reason he went into hiding. People like us who want to, talk about Islam in any context, whether it is about free speech, whether it is about blasphemy, whether it is about oppression of women by imposing or, coercing, imposing this kind of so-called modest attire.
Okay.
We are always facing this fear, and this fear is very real. And I totally defend his right to talk about blasphemy, to show the caricature of Muhammad, because he was doing his job. He was not doing anything that was outside of his job. He was lecturing his people on free speech, and it was his right. And as a civilized society and a conscious member of a civilized society, we need to be defending his right to do so.